So you want to learn how to make sourdough bread. All right, calm down, I'll teach you. There's about 15 minutes of work and like 6 hours of waiting, so you want to make sure you block out enough time. But otherwise, we can get started. To do the sourdough bread, you'll need these items. You'll need a Dutch oven, a mixing bowl, a scale, a scraper, a scorer, flour, water, salt and yeast, 2 bowls, parchment paper, and a towel. The first thing you want to do is add 460 grams of water into your mixing bowl. As you can see, I poured a little too much water in. Next, I like to go to the salt. You're going to add 10 grams into the mixing bowl. Next, I like to go to the yeast. You're going to add 320 grams of starter into the mixing bowl. A good test to see if your starter is ready is in a separate bowl, put some water in, put a dollop of the yeast in, and if it floats, that typically means your yeast is ready to bake. I like to mix these all together before adding the flour. That way, when I do add the flour, it's a nice even coating throughout. Next, you have to struggle opening your bag of flour. Once you finally get it open, you're going to add 800 grams of flour into the mixing bowl. Then you're going to mix all that together. And you're going to keep mixing. And keep mixing. Until you finally get annoyed enough and you just dump it all out. Now is where we start kneading the dough. You're going to have to put some muscle into this one, but you're going to stretch it out and pull it back together. And you're going to do that over and over again until you get a nice, smooth, strong ball of dough. Finally, you'll put the dough back into the mixing bowl and cover it with a towel. Depending on what the temperature is like where you're at, you're going to let the dough sit and rise for 2 to 3 hours. Since you already have everything out, this would be a good time to add back to your yeast. I like to put 160 grams of water and 160 grams of flour to equal my 320 that I took out. You'll mix the yeast up and then you'll cover it and put it back into the fridge. That way it lasts longer and you don't have to keep feeding it. Once you've waited your 2 to 3 hours, it's time to shape the dough. You're going to put your towels into the mixing bowl and put a nice coating of flour inside of the bowls. That way when you go to dump out the dough, it won't stick to the towel. I also like to put a little bit of flour onto my shaping surface. That way it doesn't stick too bad. Now you're going to dump out the dough and knock all of the air out of it. This is where the dough might make some noises at you, but don't worry, that's normal. You're going to spread the dough out and then you're going to cut it into 2. You can use your scale here and weigh each loaf, but I usually just like to eyeball it. Now I like to spread the dough out a little bit more and spread each corner to the center. As you can tell, it starts to make a nice rounded edge, which is starting to look a little bit more like a loaf of bread. What you're creating here is the bottom of the bread. So we have to flip the dough upside down and start pulling the bread towards us to make a nice tight loaf. As you're pulling, you want to make sure that the top stays the top and the bottom stays the bottom. So you don't want to pull too much so that it rolls over top of each other. You want to pull just enough so you feel the dough tightening. Once you have a nice tight, smooth ball of dough, you're going to flip it back upside down so that the top sits in the bottom of the bowl. Then you'll move on to the next ball of dough and repeat the same process. This is where the scraper can come in handy to help you tighten the dough. It helps so the dough doesn't stick to you. It also works great when you go to flip the dough over. Now you want to put a little bit more flour on the bottom of the dough. And cover it with the towel. Now you're going to wait another 2 to 3 hours until it's ready to bake. 20 minutes before my bread is ready to bake, I like to preheat the oven, that way it's ready to go. You also want to put the Dutch oven into your dirty oven, that way that heats up as well. Once your timer is up and your oven is preheated, you'll carefully take the Dutch oven out. Don't forget oven mitts. You'll take the lid off and put your parchment paper into the Dutch oven. You'll uncover your bread, and this can be the tricky part. You'll dump the dough into the Dutch oven without burning yourself, hopefully. And now it's time to score the bread. You want to cut deep enough into the bread so that enough air can escape, but you don't want to cut too deep that your bread becomes disformed. I like to just put 3 lines into mine, but you can get creative here and make cool designs. Now you'll cover the Dutch oven with the lid and put it back into your dirty oven. And now you're going to let your dough bake for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, you'll open your dirty oven and take the lid off. Here is where we get the nice crispy crust. You're going to let that bake for another 5 minutes. After the 5 minutes is up, you can take the Dutch oven out of your dirty oven. Now you should have a perfectly baked loaf of bread, and you can take some time to admire your work. But don't forget to do your second loaf. You'll repeat the same process and hopefully end up with 2 perfect loaves of sourdough bread. Once you take the bread out of the oven, you want to take a towel and tuck it in and let it have a little nap. This keeps the bread warm and also prolongs the baking process. That way your bread is evenly cooked on the inside. A good way to preserve your bread is to wrap it in saran wrap. I also like to wrap it in one of the towels and put it in the freezer. This will also prolong one of the loaves of bread while you eat the other one. Now let's cut into it and see how it looks. And voila, you have a perfect loaf of sourdough bread.